I found it in the back corner of an estate sale, buried under moldy National Geographics and water-stained romance novels that nobody wanted. The house itself had belonged to a woman named Edith Marsh, 93 years old when she died. No living relatives, no friends who came to claim anything. The neighbors said she spent her last decade refusing to leave her bedroom, ordering groceries delivered to the porch, and never answering the door when they knocked. They said sometimes late at night they heard her talking to someone, carrying on full conversations in a language that sounded like English played backward. I didn't believe in any of that nonsense, not then. Not when I was just a broke graduate student looking for cheap furniture and maybe some vintage items I could flip online. The book was leather-bound, cracked and peeling, with no title on the spine and no author name anywhere I could find. When I opened it, the pages felt warm, which I told myself was just the afternoon sun coming through the dirty windows. The text inside was handwritten in ink that had faded to a brownish red, and I couldn't read most of it, but I saw diagrams, circles within circles, symbols that made my eyes water when I stared at them too long. I bought it for $2 along with a brass lamp and a set of ceramic cats, and I drove home with everything rattling around in my trunk, not thinking about any of it twice. That first night I left the book on my kitchen table while I ate dinner and scrolled through my phone, and I swear the temperature in my apartment dropped 10 degrees in 20 minutes. I checked the thermostat, checked the windows, checked the vents, and everything was fine. Everything was exactly where it should be, but I could see my breath when I exhaled. I put on a sweater and blamed the old building. Blamed the landlord who never fixed anything, right? Blamed everything except the obvious. When I went to bed, I heard something moving in the kitchen, soft sounds like pages turning, and I told myself it was the radiator clicking or the building settling or anything at all, besides what it actually sounded like. In my dreams that night, I stood in a room with no walls and no floor, just endless gray nothing stretching in every direction, and something was standing behind me, breathing on my neck, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I turned around I would see something that would break my mind like glass. I woke up at 3 in the morning with tears streaming down my face and my throat, raw from screaming, and I didn't remember screaming at all. The second day, I decided to actually examine the book properly, to figure out what it was, maybe research it online, and see if it was worth anything to collectors of occult memorabilia. I photographed some of the pages and uploaded them to a forum dedicated to antique books, and within an hour, my post was deleted, and I received a private message from a moderator telling me to never share those images again. When I asked why, they blocked me. When I tried to create a new account, I found that my IP address had been banned entirely. I sat at my desk staring at my laptop, and behind me I heard something click its tongue against its teeth, a wet, disappointed sound, and when I spun around, there was nothing there except shadows that seemed darker than they should have been at 2 in the afternoon. I started leaving lights on in every room, and I started checking behind doors before I walked through them, and I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, even though somehow I knew, that a knife wouldn't help me, that nothing made of steel or iron or wood would help me against whatever was slowly seeping into my home like black water through cracks in a foundation. By the third day, the whispers started, and that was when I knew I was either losing my mind or dealing with something real, and I wasn't sure which option terrified me more. They came from inside the walls, from under the floorboards, from the dark spaces behind my appliances where dust bunnies gathered and spiders built their webs. They spoke in that same backward language the neighbors said old Edith Marsh used in her bedroom conversations, syllables that curled wrong in the air, words that felt like fish hooks dragging across the inside of my skull. I couldn't understand them, but I felt their meaning somehow, felt it in my bones and my blood and the primitive part of my brain that remembered when my ancestors huddled in caves and feared the dark. They were asking me something, demanding something, and I had no idea what they wanted, and the not knowing was almost worse than anything else. I called my mother and talked to her for 3 hours about nothing, just needing to hear a human voice, needing to remember that normal life still existed somewhere outside these walls. She asked if I was okay, and I lied and said I was just tired, just stressed about school. And when I hung up, I cried because I had never felt so alone in my entire life. I tried to get rid of the book on the 4th day, tried everything I could think of, and nothing worked. I drove to a dumpster 3 miles from my apartment and threw it in, and when I got home, it was sitting on my kitchen table exactly where I had originally left it. I took it to a used bookstore and donated it, watched the clerk put it on a shelf with my own eyes, and when I walked back to my car, it was lying on the passenger seat. I tried burning it in my bathtub, but the pages wouldn't catch. The flame just curled around them like it was afraid to touch, and the book sat there in a nest of burnt matches, looking somehow smug. I tried burying it in the park, tried throwing it in the river, tried leaving it in a church confession booth, and every single time it came back, always returning to that same spot on my kitchen table, like it was exactly where it belonged. The whispers grew louder each time I tried to abandon it, angrier, and I started finding scratches on my arms in the morning, thin red lines that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I stopped looking in mirrors because I was afraid of what I might see standing behind me, and I stopped turning off the lights entirely, and I stopped sleeping for more than an hour at a time. On the 5th night, I finally saw it, the thing that had followed the book into my home, and I still don't have words that can properly describe what I witnessed. I was sitting on my couch at midnight, surrounded by every light I owned, eyes red and burning from exhaustion, when the bulbs started flickering all at once. One by one they burst, small pops like distant gunshots, and darkness rushed in from every corner like floodwater. In that darkness, something moved, something tall and wrong, something with too many joints in its limbs, and a face that kept shifting like smoke. It didn't walk toward me so much as unfold across the space between us, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except sit there and watch it approach. When it reached me, it bent down until its face was inches from mine, and I smelled old pennies and rotting flowers and something else underneath, something that made my stomach clench with a fear so pure it felt almost religious. It didn't speak, but I heard it anyway, heard it in the marrow of my bones, and what it said was simple. I was not its victim. I was its door. The next morning I finally started reading the book properly, not just looking at it, but actually trying to understand what Edith Marsh had spent her last years compiling. The text was some kind of diary, I realized, mixed with instructions and warnings and apologies that repeated over and over in increasingly frantic handwriting. Edith had found the original source material in her grandmother's attic in 1962, had spent decades studying it, trying to understand what she had stumbled upon, and she had made a terrible mistake somewhere along the way. She had opened something that couldn't be closed, had invited something in that refused to leave, and she had spent the last 10 years of her life trying to contain it within herself so it couldn't spread any further. The rituals she had performed, the symbols she had drawn, the words she had spoken in that backward language night after night, they weren't summonings. They were bindings, chains made of sound and intent, and when she died, those chains had broken. The book was a warning and a manual and a last desperate hope that whoever found it would be smart enough to either finish what she started or run far enough that it couldn't follow. I thought about running. I thought about getting in my car and driving until I hit ocean, but I knew it wouldn't matter, knew that I had touched the book and breathed the same air as the thing it contained, and that meant I was already marked. The seventh day was when everything changed, when I made my choice, when I stopped being a victim and started being something else entirely. I spent all day studying Edith's notes, forcing myself to understand her cramped handwriting and fragmented explanations, and by sunset, I had a plan. The ritual she had used to bind the thing required 3 elements: blood freely given, words spoken with true understanding, and a vessel willing to contain what was being bound. Edith had used herself as the vessel, had let the thing live inside her for a decade, and it had slowly eaten away at everything she was until only the binding remained. I wasn't willing to do that, wasn't willing to spend the rest of my life as a prison, but the notes mentioned an alternative that Edith had rejected as too dangerous. Instead of binding the thing inside a person, you could bind it inside the book itself, trap it within the pages that had first given it entry to our world. The danger was that such a binding required you to touch the thing directly, to make contact with something that existed outside normal reality, and most people who tried went insane instantly. I drew the symbols on my floor with my own blood, just like the diagrams showed, and I spoke the words I had practiced all day, and I felt the air grow heavy and dark around me. The thing came immediately, rushing toward me like a wave, and I saw it fully for the first time, saw all its angles and hungers and terrible ancient intelligence, saw the countless others it had consumed over centuries, faces screaming silently within its shifting form. I grabbed the book and held it open between us, and I spoke the final words, the binding words, and I felt something inside me tear as I pushed against a force that human beings were never meant to oppose. It fought me. God, it fought me so hard, and I felt blood running from my nose and my ears and my eyes, felt my heart stuttering in my chest, felt my mind starting to fragment under pressure that made deep-sea depths feel gentle. But I also felt Edith there somehow, felt all the years she had spent fighting this thing, all her knowledge and strength lending itself to mine, and I held on. I held on even when I wanted to die, even when oblivion seemed preferable to another second of this agony, and I screamed the final syllable with the last breath I had in me. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital, and the doctors said I had been found unconscious in my apartment by a neighbor who smelled something burning. They said I had suffered some kind of seizure, maybe a stroke, that tests were ongoing, that I was lucky to be alive. They didn't mention the symbols on my floor or the book clutched in my arms, and when I asked about my belongings, they gave me a plastic bag with my wallet and keys and nothing else. I went home a week later, walking slowly on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, and my apartment was clean. Not just clean, but immaculate, like no one had ever lived there, like the walls themselves had been scrubbed of memory. The book was gone, truly gone this time, and I knew without being told that it had worked. The binding had worked. Whatever that thing had been, it was trapped now, sealed inside pages that would hopefully never be found again, and I was free. But freedom is a complicated word, and some things leave marks that never fully fade, and I am not the same person I was before I touched that book in Edith Marsh's estate sale. I still hear whispers sometimes late at night when the world is quiet, but they are distant now, muffled, like voices heard through thick glass. I still see shadows that move wrong, but they shy away from me now, afraid of whatever I became in that moment when I held something impossible in my hands and refused to let go. I still feel that thing watching me from somewhere far away, waiting, patient, because it has all the time in the universe and I only have decades at most. The binding will hold as long as the book exists, but books can be destroyed, can be found, can be opened by other curious people who don't know what they're touching. I spend my nights now researching, learning, preparing for the day when this might happen again, because Edith Marsh's book was not unique. There are others out there, other doors that have been opened, other bindings that are weakening with age, other things pressing against the thin membrane between their world and ours. I used to be a graduate student studying medieval literature, and now I am something else, something I don't have a name for, a guard standing at a gate that most people don't even know exists. My house is quiet now, but I know the silence won't last forever. Nothing does. And somewhere in a dusty corner of a shop no one visits, or buried in a box in someone's attic, or hidden behind false walls and houses with dark histories, the books are waiting. They are always waiting. And sooner or later, someone else is going to reach out and touch one, and the whole terrible cycle will begin again, and I will be there when it does. I have to be. I touched an old forbidden book, and it made me something new, something necessary, and the weight of that responsibility sits on my chest every moment of every day, but I carry it anyway. Because some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed, and someone has to stand in the gap and hold back what's trying to get through. That someone is me now. God help me, that someone is me.